Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third live chat in our 2021 series about the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships. My name is Jessica Soul, and I'm the Recruitment Director with the Fellowship and will be your moderator for today's chat. This live chat series is an opportunity for you to ask our fellows your questions. We hope that through these chats, you'll see how the Fellowship can impact policy and transform your career. Before we begin, I want to highlight that there is closed captioning offered for today's session. You can follow the link in the chat box to view the closed captioning. Now, to put today's session in context, we're hosting one chat each month during the application season. And we're glad you're here today and invite you to join us for the remaining 3 sessions this season. As you can see, each chat will focus on a unique aspect of the fellowship experience and will feature different fellows as panelists. We thought that the topic, "What's it like to be a fellow?" was so nuanced that it deserved 2 sessions. Last month, we focused on the fellowship as a year of service, and today we'll discuss the fellowship as a year of learning, although we won't limit our conversation as we answer your questions. STPF is currently accepting applications for our 50th class of fellows. So someone who applies by November 1st of this year will be considered for a position in the 2022-2023 fellowship class. These fellowships are an opportunity for doctoral level scientists and engineers to spend a year contributing their expertise to federal policy. They are paid, 1 year, full-time commitments in Washington, D.C. If you're wondering if you're eligible to apply or interested in an overview of the application, I encourage you to visit our application portal. We'll send a link in the chat box as well so that you can learn the ins and outs of the application. On to the purpose of today's session, for you to chat with our panelists. Please ask questions. You can use the question box in your menu bar, which you'll also see a photo of on the screen. And if you like, you can indicate the person or the people to whom your question is directed. And we'll get to as many of your questions as we can today. All right, now I am happy to introduce you to our fellows. First up, Dr. Christopher Williams has a background in molecular biology and genetics with an undergrad degree from Frostburg State University and a PhD in biology from Georgetown. Following his graduate work, Chris worked as a postdoctoral fellow at the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, until beginning his time as an STPF fellow at the National Science Foundation. He is currently the STEM education specialist at the National Museum of African American History and Culture with the Smithsonian Institution. So welcome, Chris. Next up, let's welcome Dr. Janet Chen. Janet has a PhD in ecology from the University of Wyoming. She currently serves as a fellow in the State Department in the Office for Multilateral Nuclear and Security Affairs, and that's in the Bureau for International Security and Nonproliferation. In this role, she coordinates U.S. support for work that uses nuclear technologies to address global health and sustainability issues and to advance foreign policy objectives. Thanks for joining, Janet. And our third panelist today is Dr. Lizzie Hunsaker. Lizzie is the current American Chemical Society Congressional Science Engineering Fellow working on energy and climate policy for Senator Chris Coons. In this role, Lizzie has developed broad legislative experience, crafting energy policy, supporting the appropriations process, organizing briefings and events, and fostering constituent relationships. Lizzie has a particular interest in climate diplomacy and will transition next year to an STPF Executive Branch Fellowship at the State Department. And Lizzie has a background in chemistry from Duke University. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here and sharing your time with us today. Before I get to questions from the audience that I know are coming in, I'll kick it off with one. So today's chat is all about STPF as a learning experience. So I'm wondering if you can tell us, what is one thing that surprised you during your fellowship? It could be about your role, life as a fellow, or just the federal government more broadly. I see some nodding, and I'm wondering, Janet, are you willing to start it off for us?
Sure, I can go ahead and start, and I'll keep it short actually for this answer. And I'll say that you hear so much in the news about what is happening in government. And for me in particular, it was eye-opening to see firsthand how government actually works and how policy and strategies are created, how they endure, and how they adapt over time, and how much of it isn't necessarily politicized or targeted. There's a lot of good work and a lot of good service that happens within the executive branch of government. At least I can speak for the Department of State.
Thanks, Janet. Lizzie or Chris, want to jump in?
I can hop in. Thanks, Jessica. And thanks so much for the opportunity to speak. Excited to talk with everyone. So I entered the fellowship. I became interested in the fellowship because I was really interested in the role of science in policy making, and understood kind of on an abstract level that science was absolutely crucial for the policy process, but didn't really understand what that looked like. So what surprised me is I entered this fellowship thinking that I would serve in a pretty technical capacity, writing memos and analyses, pulling data, and making recommendations grounded in science. And to be clear, I've definitely done a lot of that. But I've also, as you mentioned at the beginning, Jessica, written and negotiated legislative text and led efforts to recruit a bipartisan group of co-sponsors for bills that I've worked on, and drafted press releases and organized briefings, talked with reporters, really just being utilized as a full legislative staffer. And what that broad spectrum of responsibilities means is that I've had to learn how to find experts and cold call or cold email people to get the information that I need. And I think coming from a scientific field where you're used to being the expert and the norm is to kind of seek answers yourself and go off into a corner and read the literature, that can be a little unnerving, learning how to do that. But with the scope of the portfolio being so wide and the time so short, it's something that is really crucial. So just some experiences that surprised me, but have been really valuable.
For me, what was most surprising was as an undergrad and a graduate student, I knew all about NSF and knew about the awards that they had. I knew about the programs and different initiatives that they've been constantly pushing and sharing with scientists and engineers across the country. But what really surprised me is once I got to the NSF, I realized that there's so much information and data on the back end about all of these different programs that needs to be sifted through to determine what's actually working, what needs to be continued versus what needs to be stopped. That was surprising to me, but that also was a wonderful opportunity to get involved in a number of different topics and a number of different work areas as a fellow, because as a fellow, when you're there, you're getting paid from AAAS, and you're free. I don't want to say free labor, but you're free labor to a degree to the National Science Foundation. So, and you're talented too. You're not just free labor, you're talented free labor. So people are always looking to find ways to include smart, capable, and talented people on that project. So going into some of these different offices and different agencies, you'll find that there are a number of different ways to get involved, even beyond what you're doing, particularly in your office.
Thank you all for sharing that. And this might be a related question, but I would love to hear from everyone. Were there skills that you developed as a scientist that you felt were transferable that you brought to the fellowship? And also, what were some new skills that you had to develop during your time as a fellow? Lizzie, I see you, or are you willing to kick us off?
Sure thing. I wasn't sure if we were going in the same order. I'm happy to start. So skills that I brought to the fellowship, I think developing relationships with my team and with mentors, I found that to be incredibly helpful in grad school, and it's even more so on the Hill, just establishing those relationships that build the foundation for positive working relationships. It's just easier to talk to folks about legislative text and anything that you might need to talk to somebody about if you have that foundation for your relationship, and that's within the office and then between congressional offices. And then just the willingness and ability to ask for help is something that I certainly became comfortable with in grad school that I've brought here. And then just asking strategic questions to get the information that you need, identify gaps in knowledge, and then pursue answers to those questions. In terms of new skills, huge learning curve coming to the Hill from academia. I came straight from graduate school, and I had heard that the pace was definitely different, but the ability to work super quickly. And I'm just was so used to doing deep dives and feeling very confident about something just before speaking about it. And that's the scientist in me to point out any uncertainty. But on the Hill, you make judgments and recommendations based on the best available information that you have at the time. And that's something that I've gotten better at over the last 11 months or so.
Thank you.
For me, some of the transferable skills are obvious. Being able to read, being able to write at different levels, either at a level of someone who's in academia or someone who's the lay audience, you have to be able to do that. Being able to think deeply and analytically about any given topic that's you're presented with. Thinking about ways different topics are interconnected with each other. That's something I think scientists and engineers have been doing for all of our careers. But when it comes to new skills, some of the skills are actually old skills, but the way you're using them is slightly different. So writing and communication, as a scientist, you're writing for a very narrow audience, but when you end up coming over and being a fellow, you may be writing for other scientists, you may be writing for the general public, you may be writing for school teachers, you just don't know, you may be writing for politicians and people who don't necessarily have a lot of time to read what you're sharing. So you need to be able to write concisely, you need to be able to avoid jargon and really get to the point quickly and highlight what the point is so that people don't have to read every single word that you wrote in order to, come away with the main points. And then another skill that I had to develop was learning how to say no. Because as a fellow, as I said, things are always coming to you. People are going to start putting things on your plate. It may start off slow, but after a month or two, people are going to know that you exist. They're going to know the topics that you're working on, and they're going to try to present things that they need to have done to you. And it's important to be involved in some of these different ideas and topics that are shared with you, but you don't want to get yourself off of the track, trying to figure out where you're going. You want to stay on your own path. You can still definitely participate in things outside of what your main focus is, but try not to get off of the main path of where you're heading.
And I'll go now. So in terms of the skills that translated best to my new position at State, this isn't going to speak to everybody here, but it will probably speak to a lot of people. In grad school, a lot of people wind up working as a teaching assistant at some point during their degree. And so I would say that my experience as a teaching assistant really came in handy working in this current position, because you have to learn how to spoon feed information to people, and you have to know your audience and how to get that bite-sized information to them. So that was extremely valuable. Another thing is just understanding the science and knowing how it can be applied. So if it's going to be relevant or not for a particular issue that you're working on, or a direction that you might want to go in. Being able to sift through words and know if you're being razzle-dazzled or if they're trying to razzle-dazzle you or not, and being able to go, they're just talking about lasers. It's nothing new. This isn't a new innovative project. And on that note, being able to evaluate projects, because in my office, I do actually evaluate projects and see where we might be able to provide US government support for various areas of work. So I would say that those are the things that come in the most handy, but all of my background in molecular biology to ecology, large scale, small scale, all of it has come in handy. Just having an understanding of how the world works and how science can be applied, I think, is what it comes down to. In terms of the things that I've learned in my new position that I didn't necessarily have before, I would say diplomacy is highest on that list. In science, you have the luxury of being as frank as you want. You are actually supposed to be frank. You are supposed to challenge thought and make sure that it stands up to peer review, right? But there's more delicate intricacies, for lack of a better word, here in US government, and learning how to diplomatically address issues and not challenge them head on, I think, is a valuable skill. And to go ahead and foster goodwill is also really important. Skills that I had before but have definitely grown and have been crucial in my job include negotiation, as Lizzie said before, as well as collaboration has been essential. And maybe, you have to collaborate a little bit in science, but I think that there is no way to get around that in government. So be ready to do lots of all of those different things.
Thank you all. I was taking so many notes, and I can almost hear all the pencils of our audience too. And Chris, we have a follow-up question about when you decide to say no to things, and maybe for anyone who has to go through that process of how do I say no, how do you say no? What are the criteria you have in mind when you're deciding?
So this is a model I developed after leaving the NSF. So imagine yourself walking through a forest. You're on a path and you're heading to your destination. You have trees and plants all around you. So anything that you can reach out and touch that's not taking you off of your path, say yes to that. If it requires you to deviate from your path and start a new path or just move you further from your goals, then I would say stay on your path and continue on with what you were doing. So that's how I think about it. You have to see if whatever you're being asked to do is going to require either a lot of time or a lot of energy, even if it's just for a short time. But if it's a lot of energy for a short time and you can make a quick deviation and hop back on your own path, then it's not so bad. But if it's something that's going to take you way off your path and then maybe eventually fork and take you somewhere else, then you have to be a little more cautious when it comes to saying yes. So you have to learn to ask questions. What is expected of me? How frequent are we going to be meeting? When is the due date for this? Who are we going to be working with? Like, you need to consider all of those things to make sure that you're not saying yes and giving all of your time away. Like, that's been a problem for me for a lot of my professional career, but I've been learning over the past few years just how to say no, and just to make sure that my goals and my focus, my professional goals and my professional focus are still being met. And then I try to add anything else in that either develops a new skill or, it's just fun for me, myself.
I mean, Janet and Lizzie, anything else you want to add to what Chris shared from your perspectives? Because I do think that strategic no is so hard.
Yeah, Christopher, I love that advice a lot. If you prioritize everything, you're really prioritizing nothing. It's like highlighting the entirety of a book. In my case, I found that really the office's priorities and Senator Coon's priorities when it comes to climate and energy are really my priorities. So we do legislative planning every year, and everything is just incredibly strategic. And that helps kind of set the path of activity over the year, and we continuously review that. So, when it comes to bills that I'm working on, it's really guided very heavily by that planning that we do at the beginning of the year and are continuously revisiting. But that's kind of high-level strategy. But then you have incoming, day to day, and everybody has ideas and wants you in your congressional office or in your agency to take a look at them. And you can't say yes to everything because everybody wants something, and they might all be good ideas, but you just can't do everything. So it's about, looking at whether it has relevance to Delaware, whether it has, whether it's in alignment with Senator Coon's priorities in our portfolio, whether there's an opportunity to branch into a new area. So it's kind of at a high level, but then on the day-to-day, you really become a master at dragging items up and down your to-do list based on fluctuating deadlines and new items coming in. I actually physically will drag things on my OneNote file and keep track of that. And it's something that takes a little bit of time to get used to, but those are constantly changing as priorities change, even throughout a single day.
And I would just echo everything that Chris and Lizzie have already said. So just to add on to that, a good saying that I've heard, and I know I'm going to butcher it, is behind every good yes is 1,000 no's. So it is important to prioritize. And when you prioritize and when you need to say no, you don't say no. At least that's something that I've learned in my position. We don't say no. We leave doors open. And so leaving that option to explore at a later time if the stars aren't aligning. Also offering alternatives. if you can't give them what you want, but there's still an opportunity for development, or you need to maintain a certain level of development, to provide an alternative. And with all of these decisions, to get top cover is what we call it, to make sure that you have the approval of your higher ups to make that decision.
Thank you all. I feel like we just got a lot of great advice for a fellowship year and for life in general. So I'm glad we took that tangent. And we have a couple of questions that relate to policy and politics. And so I'm going to try to merge them. And I would love to hear from each of you kind of how your time as fellows intersected with policy, right? You were bringing science to policy, and how, if at all, you bumped into politics, and just what it was like at those interfaces, and what was the benefit of kind of being there in those spaces as a fellow. And Lizzie, because you were in a congressional office, I'm wondering if you're willing to go.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks for the question. Yes, does policy bump into politics on the Hill? Absolutely, every single day, every second. So I think this actually gets back to a question that I brought up at the beginning of the session, and that really guided my decision to pursue the fellowship, is recognizing that of all of the factors that influence what decisions get made and what policies actually pass into law, I knew that science was one piece of that, but I also understood that there were different values at play and whose voices are heard, and relationships and timing are so important. And so I think, what my experience has been is that we do the best we can to let science and the need to drastically draw down our emissions to meet mid-century climate goals. We recognize scientifically what those needs are, and then we look at what is feasible in the current, United States Senate, and then in the broader Congress. And those two things are not always the same. So then it's a matter of, what can we accomplish? And in my experience, what's been really fascinating about the office that I'm working in is there's a really big focus on bipartisanship, and the idea that the durable policies are those that are bipartisan. So it's given me just a really incredible and valuable opportunity to work across the aisle and really find a way to look for common ground and say, okay, here's what we need to be doing. Here's what I would advise just on a purely scientific level. And then what can we actually move this year while keeping our ambitions in a certain place as well. So absolutely comes into the decision process. And it's something that's definitely new as a scientist coming to the Hill.
I can go next and say just very briefly on this part, in terms of the intersection of policy and politics, that everyone's experience is going to be different coming into this fellowship. So I don't want to say anything that would be too broad sweeping as a generalization. I think that a lot of this is going to depend on whether you go into an office that focuses on policy or program. And so there are people who enter the fellowship that are just focused on program the entire time and don't really see a lot of the effect of politics, and don't get involved in the policy, and just focus on implementing whatever sort of objective that they're supposed to do. I can say that my office does focus on policy. So that's something you're going to want to think about when you're applying for your fellowship. And when you wind up in placement is, do I want to go into an office that does policy or program? Like, what are my ultimate goals? And then if you want that exposure of where policy and politics interface, then to think about whether that might be in a position like Lizzie's current fellowship, or if there are offices throughout the executive branch that might give you a flavor of that as well. I'll leave it at that.
And so I was a fellow from 2016 to 2018. So I came in September 2016, and then a few months later, Donald Trump was elected. And I know the country felt a certain way. A lot of people felt a certain way, but honestly, the day-to-day workings in my office at the NSF didn't change one bit. The only thing that changed that I remember at the old NSF building was the photo of the president when you're walking into the building. Other than that, everybody was still exactly the same, and there wasn't much impact on what I was doing. But like Janet said, that can be different depending on where you're placed. That's not just within, not just depending on which agency you're placed in, but where you're placed within the agency. So I was in the Office of Integrative Activities, and I was working primarily on a single program. So I didn't see much of that. But I imagine if you were in the Office of Legislative and Public Affairs at NSF, you may have a quite different experience than what I had. So it really just comes down to where you want to be, how involved with politics and big policy you want to be, or if you want to be involved with smaller policy ideas, like how much money goes to an awardee for your particular program. So there are different ways to think about policy. You have big policy at the larger level, and then you have small policy down at the programmatic level.
Yeah, thank you all. And I appreciate that you're saying it really can be driven by somebody who's applying interest, the type of impact they want to have, the type of environment they're interested in working in and experiencing. And I imagine that we're getting lots of questions right now about, so how do I know what an office is like, right? How do I know if I'm applying what I'm looking for? And so I'm wondering if we can think about going through that application and interview process as a learning experience itself, right? And so I'm wondering if each of you could maybe describe that process a little bit. What was it like to apply an interview? And especially with you, Lizzie, as a partner society and also AAAS executive branch fellow, maybe being able to compare and contrast that. Chris, maybe are you willing to share what you can remember of your process?
Yeah, so all I remember is that it's a long process. And the reason I say that is it's about a 9-month process from when you apply, at least to when you start. And I remember I met one of the incoming fellows. His wife had just gotten pregnant, and then the baby was there before the fellowship even started. So that just shows how long of a gap it is when it comes to applying and then actually starting the fellowship. But before starting the fellowship, I was at the NSF, at the NIH working as a postdoctoral fellow, and the NIH is full of current fellows and former fellows. So I did informational interviews with probably at least 5 or 6 folks that I already knew, and I already had other people in my network who were already fellows. And then another great thing is during the process of applying, as you move through the different rounds of the application process, you have an opportunity to engage with current fellows to ask them, what is your experience like? And I think that's where you get the best information that's going to allow you to understand if an office is right for you or if you need to look somewhere else.
I'll chime in. That would be my number one advice, actually, is what Chris just said, to talk to as many fellows as you possibly can. I don't know how many I ended up talking to during the span of the time when I decided I wanted to apply for the fellowship and when I actually did, but it was a lot. And everyone will have different perspectives, some that will resonate with you and some that won't. And it could be that, there was a fellow who was like, yeah, my office worked crazy hours and I loved that. And you're like, absolutely not. That sounds terrible. So it's not just about saying like, oh, did you like this office? It's about, did you like this office and what did you like about this office? Because those values and those kind of check boxes that you're looking for may not be this, or definitely won't be the same from person to person. So just thinking about how you frame those questions and what information you get. I will also share that while you're talking to fellows, I think when I was talking to folks, I just was thinking, oh, these are current or former fellows. So everything that they say must be exactly right. And so just want to reemphasize that it really is going to be so different based on what you're looking for, what your goals are, what their goals are. And it doesn't make them right or wrong. It just makes it their own perspective. So getting as many of those perspectives as you can is going to be incredibly helpful. And And I will also share, I applied initially for both the executive branch and the congressional, and had the opportunity to kind of choose last year. And I remember talking to a former fellow, and I'll never forget, he said, if you like the wheeling and dealing of it all, go to Congress. And that just really stuck with me. I didn't know if I liked the wheeling and dealing of it all, but I wanted to find out how I felt about that. So that's why I ultimately ended up taking the congressional position, but I'm really excited to be moving on next to get the executive branch. So that's the other thing to keep in mind, is that you know, if you're trying, for example, to choose between pursuing a congressional placement or an executive placement, it's fairly common for people to transition the following year to the other branch.
Echoing everything that Christopher and Lizzie already said, and also agreeing that asking around is the best way to get feedback on what might be the right fit for you. But something else that I wanted to say was, when you interview with offices, when it comes to that time, you will have the opportunity to share what it is that you're trying to achieve and get out of your fellowship. And it's a gamble, right? It's a chance for you to put yourself out there and really see if it's a match or not, or to be flexible and say, I'm here to learn, tell me what to do, I want to do it. So you can go either way. And I remember at the end of my interview week, I decided to go for broke with a couple of offices, because by that time I was fairly certain what I wanted to do. And so I did very specifically say, listen, if I work for this office, this is what I would want to do. And I figured that putting myself out there was the only way. If they were to say, yes, that's perfect, then I would realize that that would be a better fit than something else, right? But then again, it's gamble, because you don't know if that office that you think that you're best suited for is thinking the same thing about you. It's a very tricky process. Don't think about it too much until you get to that point, is all I can say. But keep it in the back of your mind for if you do reach that stage. I can also say, though, that once you are done with this fellowship, you will have assumed to graduate from the fellowship stage to being like DC quality, and people will expect you to say what it is you want out of something afterwards, and you should be able to articulate exactly why you think you're a good fit for a certain office, what you expect to achieve the next year, the next 5 years, the next 20 years. So have a good vision. So there's no harm in practicing that now.
I have some chills from hearing that. And it's also visualizing what Christopher shared earlier about knowing your path, right? But how are you guiding yourself down that path in this forest of opportunity? I wonder if you all remember specifically the interview process, the semi-finalist interview process, which is a virtual panel interview, and the memo writing. And we have a question about, had you done memo writing before, or was that a new experience? Chris, I saw you laughing.
Yeah, the memo was something that terrified me, but for no reason, because I just heard I had to write a memo and I was intimidated a little bit. But after getting examples of memos that had been submitted by previous fellows, I realized it's not as difficult as I was thinking it was. It's really about concise writing with clear goals, clear messages about what you think should happen and why you think it should happen, and any justification you think you need to include. So for the application, for the application process, you have to submit a memo. Once you get through the first round of the application process, you submit a memo, at least in my year, to the agency where you think you're going to be or where you would like to be, addressing an issue in science, in STEM. Mine was about STEM education and how we can increase the number of scientists who stay in STEM after they graduate from undergrad, and just increase participation. And so the memo, it's really good because it gives you an opportunity to do background research, and your memo is only going to be a page long. So that's what you're going to share with the committee. And the committee interview process is a little bit intimidating, because you open your computer and they're all sitting there in a single room. I think it was about maybe nine people around a U-shaped table. and they all take turns asking questions either about you personally, about your career goals, or about your memo. And so you already know yourself, but you do need to know why you want to do the things that you want to do. And so you need to have an idea about what you want to do with your experience that you'll get from the fellowship. But when it comes to the memo, it's very important that even though you can't put all of your justifying information into it, you need to have all that stuff ready to go. Because I remember once they asked me, how are you going to fund this idea that you proposed? But I did the math. I remembered, I said, if you take this amount, this percentage from each of these different programs, it will give you this amount and would allow us to pay recent graduates $50,000 for up to this many years to allow them to continue to work in STEM and not have to worry about loan repayments and things of that nature. So you really have to think several steps ahead of your committee. So think of it like a dissertation committee. You need to be the world's expert on that little single topic, even though you're not the expert, but you need to show that you can think like an expert, that you can share ideas fluidly, and then also make sense, not only with the words that you're saying, but also with the dollar amounts, because everything costs money.
Yeah, it's funny that you said like your dissertation committee, because I was just thinking that's kind of what it felt like. So I spent days and days on my memo the first go around. Like I said, I had applied for the executive branch twice. So when I applied the first time, I had never really written a memo like that before. And so I just really agonized over it and just spent a really long time on it. So I think looking at example memos is great advice. That's actually not something I did. I just kind of muddled through it, but I did talk to a former fellow just to kind of get advice on how to structure it. So either way, but I think looking at example memos is great. One thing to keep in mind is that you have control over your memo presentation. You don't have control over what the committee asks you. It could be anything. And this is what makes me think about like prelim or defense. The way that it worked at Duke was you had your like open door presentation where you just gave your presentation, no one interrupted you, you had control over what you were going to say, you could practice it and be ready. That's what your memo presentation is like. And there's this terrible but very helpful 5-minute countdown timer on the screen that you can see while you're presenting because it's virtual. And so just practicing that you actually do fall within that 5-minute timer is really helpful, because that's the part you have control over. And then in terms of the questions, it is really stressful. You have no idea what the committee is going to ask you. One way to kind of prepare yourself is to do a mock interview. So you can find a friend, share your memo with them and say, like, what kind of questions come to mind when you read this memo? You can do that with your regular interview too, not even related to your memo. I set up mock interviews with our career center at Duke. So I would imagine a lot of schools have the capability to do that. So would definitely recommend that. And then if you get a question that just entirely stumps you, I think it's helpful to kind of just talk out loud about how you would figure something out. Like, I don't know the exact answer to that, but you know, here's the kind of information that I would try to get, or here's the kind of person I would talk to, and just try to talk through your thought process and not get too hung up on the exact answer.
I have nothing to add to any of that.
No, I thought that was so great. And Lizzie, I think it's interesting because I do think sometimes you may get asked a question that you are not going to know the answer to, just to see how you handle it, how you approach that situation. And so sharing your process about how you do approach a situation where you're unfamiliar or uncomfortable is part of what a committee might be looking for. And so just being comfortable in the discomfort of that. And I know that there are now some blogs written by fellows that we can share that are specifically about the interview process or about policy memo writing, because I know they can cause a lot of stress for folks who are going through it and are new to the policy space and policy writing space. But evidence on the screen of 3 fellows who made it through that process, even if it was new to them. And I'm wondering now about the fellowship as learning not just about a role or a position, but how you're learning about yourself and where you want to go in your career after the fellowship. And there's a question here for you, Chris, that's about STEM education and what was your interest level before the fellowship and how might the fellowship have shaped your interest in that to where you are today?
So when I applied to graduate school, my goal was to graduate and run my own lab and be a PI. So my graduate school experience wasn't bad, but it was definitely tough, which most graduate school experiences are. So I was like, okay, that's just what graduate school is. That's no big deal. I'm going to keep moving on towards this goal. So I did 2 years of a postdoc at the NIH, and at the end of my second year, I realized that research isn't for me. I'd always been involved in STEM education since like midway through my graduate school time. So this was something that had been growing inside, like an interest just continuing to grow. And I continued to be involved in STEM education. So I started really getting involved through a volunteer opportunity at the Carnegie Academy for Science Education down in Washington, D.C. I did that for a couple of years, and then I started my own nonprofit STEM organization. And it was at that point I realized that STEM education is not only what I'm interested in, I think it's what I'm best at. Like I was a good researcher at best, but I think I'm a good to on the way to becoming great STEM educator. And so I knew that this is where I wanted to put my energy. So I started to look for different opportunities that would allow me to move away from the bench and move more towards STEM education. And I knew once I learned about this AAAS fellowship, I learned that there are different types of policy, because policy to me before was more, I used to think that's what Lizzie does, that type of policy. I only thought about that, but like I said, there's big policy, which Lizzie does, and then there's small policy when it comes to programs and different initiatives that you have at science organizations run by the federal government. And so I knew I was going to apply to either to NIH or NSF as a fellow, and I was accepted into an office at the NSF. And while I was there, I did my best to make sure that I was involved with anything related to K-12 STEM education. I tried to get in the government agency, the FC STEM committee, and I participated in that as much as I could. And then when it came time to leave the fellowship, I told myself, I'm not going back to academia. I'm either going to do something about science policy writing, or I'm going to just try to do STEM education. And the position at the museum came along at the right time in the right way for the right pay. So I told myself, this is exactly what I'm going to do. This gives me the opportunity to really bring my passion to the front and get paid to do it. Because by the time I started working at the museum, I'd been volunteering in STEM education for nearly a decade. And I said, it is time to, get some money for what I've been doing for a while, and then to have nothing else to do outside of work, just work, and then come home and be with my family. And so that was kind of my path towards ending up at the museum. It's a pretty cool story. I'll tell it one day, but I'm not going to tell it right now.
Thank you. Lizzie or Janet?
What was the question?
Janet, you go first this time.
Sure. I don't really remember what the question is, but I did have 2 points. But what was the question again?
Like how your experiences as a fellow have helped you understand yourself and like discern your career interests.
Got you. I would say that flashbacks to what Lizzie, described earlier about just you're drinking from the fire hose. Work is really fast paced. You're exposed to so much. It's great to take a deep breath during all of that and look at the landscape, because in looking at the landscape, you actually see the broad spectrum of possibilities that are out there, not just the one that you're actually working on. You interact with everybody in DC. You get to see people who do this, that, and the other thing. So just being immersed in this environment, it helps you realize, maybe you want to do stuff in program work, maybe you want to do stuff with policy, maybe you want to do stuff in politics, maybe you want to work these crazy hours. And do people thrive off of the fast-paced work versus other people are like, no, I want the 8 to 5. Those are all the basics to get it. I don't want to get into anything too specific, but I do want to point out a couple key quotes. One that I heard before in a career workshop, and Christopher, you said something similar a few seconds ago. Go towards the thing that gives you energy. Don't go towards the thing that's going to make you successful, give you more power, give you more money. Go towards the thing that gives you the most energy, because that will be the thing that you wind up being best at and that will allow you to bring the most to this world. And I will say that I have seen this time and time and time again in every environment that I've been in, whether it's in DC or at United Nations or in academia. Don't climb a ladder just because you see it there. And so I will leave it at that.
Yeah, all such great points. I think this is a good opportunity to speak a little bit more about paths and plans and goals. So just thinking about like the trajectory leading up to this fellowship and then where it's left me wanting to go. I applied to grad school without knowing what I wanted to do with a PhD. I knew that I was actually kind of the opposite to Christopher. I knew I didn't want to stay in academia, but I just kind of felt like I wasn't done learning. But I've certainly heard people say, like, do not go to grad school if you don't know exactly what you want to do with a PhD. And I would disagree with that. I went to grad school. I looked for a lab where I really connected with the people. I was pretty open on the topic that I actually was going to be focused on. And I ended up, looking at how nutrients impact a fungal pathogen's response to drug stress. And I had a great experience because I had a great team that I worked really well with. And then when I came to the Hill, I was also, I had a loose idea of what I wanted to work on. I had a research background that kind of played in the realm of health policy, and I was interested in climate change, recognized it was a huge issue and something that I would be interested in working on. But I took the same approach in my interviews. I said, what team am I going to work best with? What's going to be the best environment for me? Ended up working on climate and energy policy, which was outside the area of my immediate expertise coming in. And I absolutely love it and want to stay in that policy area moving forward. So I do think that it's really good to have goals, but I would just caution, don't beat yourself up if you don't know exactly what you want to do. Everyone is trying to figure out what they want to be when they grow up. And I do think that in DC, it's common for conversations to happen where it sounds like you should know exactly where your life is going. And I think it's this very delicate balance between having goals and being very clear about what you want in life while also giving yourself a pass and recognizing that we're all trying to figure out exactly what it is that gives us energy and where exactly we want to go. So just speaking from my situation, I know that I want to stay in energy and climate policy. I know I'll be going to state and working on climate diplomacy for the next, 1 to 2 years. But beyond that, it'll be informed by my next step, and I'll just keep gathering information and kind of fine tuning my plans based on what I learn about myself and the opportunities.
Thank you all. And Lizzie, what you were just sharing and thinking about the balance and understanding ourselves, like we are not only our work, and we don't end at our work, at our jobs. And so tell me about work-life balance. How do you have it? How do you find it? How do you sustain it?
I can go first with that one because that is actually something that I think is a well-known challenge for fellows at state, actually, maybe more so than some of the other departments and agencies. And it takes discipline. So you can work as long as you want to, or you can set boundaries. And I think part of that is also going to be observing the office culture too, when you start, and to ask around and also ask your office what's expected of you. And it's up to you. I can say that on top of just the work part of it itself and creating that balance there's also an interesting new balance that I struggled with in DC. And I think that we should throw that into the mix as well. And so in DC, like on top of like things being so fast paced at work and making sure that you're on top of it for the next day as well, and rinse and repeat, there's also just the fast-paced culture, like life at work. And so it's like after work, a lot of people don't go home. It's like they go to a happy hour somewhere and they network. And I find that a lot of the places that you go to, it's like there's no shut off. You're constantly networking, even if you're going for a dinner with friends. And so you will have to find a way to find your zen and keep yourself grounded if you come here. So just something to raise for people's awareness.
And I appreciate that, Janet. And we are all, if we're working from home, right, there is literally no physical balance there for us. Lizzie or Chris, anything you want?
Yeah, I can go next. This is really hard. Janet, that's the discipline piece has been my experience too. It really is a decision that every individual has to make, and there are a lot of factors that weigh on how easy or hard it is to make that decision. Like, is what you want in alignment with your office? That's one thing. And then just also the culture around that, if it's not in alignment. So if it is in alignment, then there's really no friction, and it doesn't require a lot of discipline because you feel like the culture is such that you're doing what everyone else is doing, and it's not quite as challenging. But yeah, I think the challenge at the end of the day is that the work is going to be there. There's always more work than there is time, and so you can keep working. And so one thing that kind of a motto, I guess, that I adopted in grad school was, and I think it was Jen Heemstra who said this, who's just a fantastic woman in science. And she said, push when you need to push and rest when you need to rest. And that just really resonated with me. And I try to live by that. What's challenging is a lot of times in Congress, you always need to push. There's not much rest. So it does require discipline for sure. But being with a team who you enjoy working with and being around makes those times when you're pushing a lot easier and more enjoyable.
And I missed the question because I was keeping my children from fighting each other. So could you ask me one more time, please?
I think that is the answer to the question about work-life balance. So, so about how, if at all, do you find that, or just find the balance, or does it not exist?
Well, I have better work-life balance now than I've ever had. But while I was a fellow, it is fast-paced. It's a lot of work to do. You're only in the fellowship for a year or maybe 2 years max. So you want to get as much done as you can. And sometimes you think that the way to do that is trying to work longer hours or just be involved in more. But that's not necessarily the best way. For some people it is, but for me it's not. So I would say you need to pick a couple of things that are the most interesting to you, to do those, but to not let them overwhelm the rest of your life. You need to sleep, you need to eat, you need to have fun. If you have family, you need to be with them and spend time with them. You need to make sure the animal part of you, the actual physical body of you, is able to do all of the human things that you're trying to push it to do. So you need to definitely have your priorities straight. As a younger man, work came first. It always came first. Now I have kids. Family comes first. Taking care of myself comes first as well. Getting enough sleep comes second. And then work is third or fourth now. So you just have to figure out how to prioritize your time, because I don't know who said it, whether it's Janet or Lizzie, the work will never end, because the more work you do well, the more work people will want you to do. So you just have to set your boundaries, and don't set a precedent by answering emails at 8 o'clock at night unless you absolutely have to. Don't let people know that you're watching, or they will continue to reach out to you. So, you can kind of hang in the background and you can see it, but don't respond.
Thank you all so much. And I can't believe that it is nearly the end of our time together. And so I'm going to have one more question for all of us. And that is, thinking about your experiences, thinking about all that we're learning during the fellowship about ourselves, about the federal government, about impact and what that means for us personally. Why do you think a scientist or engineer should spend a year right? Take this time out of their life and spend it increasing their policy knowledge and skills. Janet, you're first on my screen.
Okay. I'm going to say that there's two good reasons to immerse yourself in policy to enhance your knowledge and skills. The first reason is to understand how policy works so that you can have a better shot at navigating it in the future. And so I can tell you that, you know, for example, I've been approached by nonprofits who have come or approached me with unfeasible proposals for support and timelines. And in my mind, I'm thinking if they had some understanding of how this all worked, then they could better come up with a better strategy to begin with that might line them up for success. The second reason that you might want to do all of this is just because it's an opportunity to pivot into policy, into government. So as scientists, this, the AAAS STPF is fantastic opportunity. Like it's the only one I really know of to do this sort of pivot into government work if that's what you want to do. And one of the things that I want to throw out there, kind of on a tangent but not fully, is to say that to not only think about doing this, but about the timing of when you might do this. And for me, the timing wasn't necessarily something I decided. I didn't get the fellowship the first time I applied. And I'm really glad I didn't get the fellowship the first time I applied because of the experiences that I had in between the first time I applied and now having it. You know, I went abroad and I worked at a research institute in Finland and I worked at the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna. And both of those experiences helped me envision how I would use this fellowship in ways that I couldn't imagine before when I applied the first time. So I've come into this with a much better strategy of what I want to get out of it. And I've also come to it with better skills to demonstrate my ability in my current position and, you know, to kind of, I hate to use the word, but prove my worth to the people around me. Either way, if you get this now or you get this later, it'll be great. But timing is something to think about as well. Over.
Lizzie, I think it's you next. Oh, sorry, we're going in order. Thank you. Yeah, that's great advice. Not a whole lot to add. I would just say, in addition to the points that Janet mentioned, you also just never know what you're going to learn, who you're going to meet, and where those things might take you. It's just an opportunity to do something entirely different from what you've done before. It's 1 to 2 years, so it can be a transition into a longer career and pivot your entire career trajectory, like Janet was saying, or it can be something that you try on for a year or two and decide that you want to go back to the environment that you were in before, and it gives you that flexibility to go either way. So I think everyone should do this fellowship because you just never know the opportunities that it's going to open up. Over.
And Janet and Lizzie both took two of my points, which is fine. Like you won't, like working in a federal agency, participating in this fellowship, you learn how different federal agencies work. And because you're going to have contacts with all of the other federal agencies, you're going to learn how they work too, at least to some degree. On top of that, this is following up on what Lizzie said, is you're going to add new wrinkles to your professional game. You're going to develop new skills that you never had any interest in or never thought you could use, only to find out that your next job or any job in the future is actually looking for someone with those exact set of skills. So you never know what you're going to learn is going to positively impact your career in the future. But the last thing I want to say is networking. So when you're a fellow, just think about this. You're coming into a competitive fellowship with 150 of the smartest, most talented scientists and engineers in the country. So for a short term, you can just think about it saying, I'm having amazing experiences, I'm learning new skills, I'm meeting cool people. But if you think about it in the long game, all of these people are going to either stay in their federal agencies or continue to move up through the federal agencies, or they're going to disperse to different things around the country. And once you're a AAAS fellow, other AAAS fellows are always looking for us. So you just never know how your time as a fellow is going to help you, or who else you're going to be able to help. And as you rise up in level of responsibility in whatever organization you're in, just remember your other people are rising up as well. So you're going to have connections, really high level connections that may allow you to make really big gains in the future, not only for yourself, but also for the people that you're trying to serve. So just think about it as it's not a networking game, but that is a big part of being a fellow, just figuring out where you want to go next and how you can do it and who you can help do that for as well. I'm going to say this over.
Chris, Lizzie, Janet, thank you all for all that you've shared today. And thinking about what you just shared, Chris, we are accepting applications right now for our 50th class of fellows. This is a part of history. You're connecting with that community, not just of your class, but all of the classes before you. And so keep that in mind as you think about whether to apply this year. And thank you everyone who joined for your great questions as well, for keeping the conversation going. Our next chat is going to take place August 18th, all about career exploration and professional opportunities. So I hope you can join for that. The application is open through November 1st. And we'll send you a recording of this and some resources in the coming days as well. And if we couldn't get to your question today, please email us at fellowships@AAAS.org, as seen on the screen, to continue the conversation right there. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Thank you again. Bye.